Rainbow Six Siege is, in my opinion, the best first person shooter ever made. And I don't say that lightly. I love first person shooters. I've played a ton. I work at Call of Duty, so that's where most of my day is going, thinking about first person shooters for sure. And most of my free time when it comes to gaming is playing Escape from Tarkov, which is another first person shooter and probably my favorite right now. But even though that's my favorite, I don't think it's the best. I think when I think about a first-person shooter at its core and the game that did it best, I'm constantly referring back to Rainbow Six Siege. And I think there's two things that Rainbow Six Siege did really, really well that make it stand out amongst all the other FPSs. And those two things, if I were to summarize them, the first one I would say is called Life After Death. I think Rainbow Six Siege took a mode like search and destroy or bomb where you have one life basically and you die and then you're just spectating your teammates, and they took it to another level because now you can look at these cameras and give call outs to players who are in the game, and you actually feel engaged in the firefight even though you've already died. That's incredible, and I think it really opened up a doorway into a great amount of gameplay and ways to engage with the game even after you've taken a bullet to the head. And I understand Rainbow Six wants to expand on that a lot in their future seasons. So I'm excited about that development, and I think it's something that for certainly sets them apart. But the second reason, and I think this one is going to stand out to more people, I would say is called destructibility. Now, we've certainly seen destructibility before. I think Battlefield really paved the way there in a very big way that a lot of people seen. And obviously, if you're going to call it Minecraft and FPS, though I don't think the gunplay, is considered as much for Minecraft, but destructibility there is obviously insane. But when it comes in any really voxel world, right, that's like what they always go for, destructibility for voxel games. But when it comes to Rainbow Six Siege, they have done something that I've never seen before, which is vertical gunplay. So you can poke holes in the ground and shoot players who are below you, which I think is insane. And I'm working right now on porting, not really a port, that's not fair to say, but I'm making a 2D game, which is very much inspired by Rainbow Six Siege. And since it's a 2D game, I'm not going to have vertical gunplay because that's you can't really do that from a top-down perspective. I'm targeting a user interface very similar to the game Door Kickers, if you ever played that one. However, it's still very important for you to be able to see where other people are on the map, even if you can't have a direct line of sight to them. And I think Rainbow Six Siege has done this in a really creative way that we've seen before, but they've done it particularly well. And I'm going to go over in this video a tutorial of how you can do that for your game. So first, let me just show you what we're talking about here. I would call these things in the top left and the top right icons. So these icons, these 2D non-diegetic images represent which characters are in the game. They might even represent their health. So you can see there's a little bar here to represent how much health they have. And maybe if it's crossed out, it can represent whether or not they're currently alive, which I guess is redundant. The health does the same thing. But what's really cool here is not only do they show up here, but they also show in the game world. So if you check this out on the bottom right, you could actually see Smoke's player icon. And so I call this the live icon. I call it the live icon basically because it follows the player as he moves around the match. So we're going to see as this guy's moving around, he can see that his buddy is behind this wall here moving around. And he also has an outline of his figure, of his silhouette, which I think is really cool. And I haven't quite gotten to that stage yet. But I'm just thinking about the icon specifically. And this is such a cool shot, right? Because you could see you've got a buddy over here. You got one behind this wall, one over here. I just think this is an awesome way to represent that information in a way that is 2D. And obviously this is a little bit more casual than something like Escape from Tarkov, where you wouldn't get any indicators of that whatsoever, right? But I feel like this is a really great middle ground, and this is something I wanted to achieve in my game. So here's how I did it. So first, let me just show you the finished product. And here, we're going to jump into Unity. And I've got a bunch of clients open here. So I'm just going to jump into a lobby and get a bunch of my buddies to join me. These are just bots. So let us do that. So I guess I'm missing the most important part here. Here's where you design your icon. So the way that I've set this up here is basically the top two arrows will change the foreground icon, and then the bottom two arrows will set up the background icon. You can change the color of the foreground icon with this little slider here, And then you could also change the two main colors of the background icon with these two sliders over here. So the way that I did this is those sliders are this free asset called the Flexible Color Picker, which you can get from the Unity Asset Store. And let me see. And so the second thing is I have a color mask, which I created originally with a shader graph. And this is a great tutorial from Minions Art on how to do that. But basically, you have these raw images, which are red and green, and blue, but in my case, just red and green, since I'm only using two colors. And then you can replace those colors with whatever colors the user specified. So what this looks like, sort of behind the hood, is we've got a, let's check this out. So we've got the foreground element here. So this is basically just a source image, which we're changing. So you can see this source image. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen. Okay, so this is the source image up here. You can just see it's changing between like the bear and the bomb as I can toggle through this. And that's simply just indexing into a folder that I have in resources. And then for the background, it's a little bit more complicated. We do have that shader, which is on a material called Color Switch. So I originally did make this in shader graph, but what's going to be a consistent theme with this video is Unity decided not to work in a very critical way. So you could follow that tutorial for how to set this up. Basically, you start with a red and green image, and eventually you can replace it with whatever two colors you want. In this case, it's purple and blue, but you could change that around to do whatever cool colors you want. And so that's how that is set up. It's basically just a very simple shader graph, which I then exported to, let me get that, it's called Color Switch, which I then exported to an actual shader code, which I then needed to edit a little bit because, and I believe the case was, you can't have transparency by default from shader graph. So this is going to happen all the time when you develop with Unity. You're going to run into bonehead decisions that make you say, what the fuck? How has this tool been around since 2000 whenever and it's still broken? I've been working in Unity since 2004. Is that right? 2014, I think it was. 2014. I've been working in Unity since Unity 5. So we are, what, 2014 versions later or something like that, right? And it's still super broken. So I'm not going to rant too much about Unity, but basically it's not enough to use shader graph. You have to export it. And the whole goal of creating shaders without people needing to know shader code was totally mute because you can't do it. So you have to then convert it to an actual shader code, and you have to add in these stencil properties, which are going to, and you could just Google how to do that, but that's going to allow you to have some transparency, which is important because I did want the edges to be round. Now, my source images were actually not round. So let me see if I could find, so this is tile 039. So my source images were not round. They were each squares. But I thought, okay, maybe I can create the shader, and in a cool way, I can just taper it by the sides so that it will then be a rounded square, because I did think a rounded square would look a lot cooler than just a square. But it turns out you can't do that in shader graph, which is, stupid. So I then went through every single one of my source images, right? Maybe 100 of these here. And I just cropped the edges. So all of them now have that wonderful rounded square look, but that's literally just coming from the source image. I'm not doing that with post-processing because Unity's a pain in the ass. So once you have that all set up, I basically just serialize the index of the background image, the index of the foreground image, and then the three colors that I'm going to need to recreate that icon. And that is all created when I log in. So let me just reload this because it looks like I have a little bit of an error here. But that should log in just a moment. So I log this in like that. Push log in. And then here is my lobby. The back end for this game is all Photon. And maybe we'll talk about that a bit later in a future devlog about how much fun it is to work in Photon. It's actually not too bad. I really enjoy Photon. And so here, you could just select where you're going to spawn and stuff. And here's where we get to the fun part. So I'm walking around the world, and the world is dark by default. So this is how I wanted to sort of, the issue with a 2D game, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, particularly if you play Rainbow Six Siege a lot, is, you have some information that you don't know. Like, you don't know where the enemy players are. And I think that is kind of hard to do in 2D, because when you're looking straight at a top-down view, you can kind of see everything that's on the board. So my solution here was to have basically everywhere except for where you're looking to be occluded by this shadow darkness. And so you have a flashlight, and anywhere that you look will then be revealed, whatever's there. So in order to create this, I followed this tutorial, which which is from CodeMonkey. It's called Field of View Effect in Unity, and it's actually a really great tutorial. I do recommend it. This is a great channel, by the way, if you want to dive in a little deeper and understand and just understand how to make a game for some, I'd say, intermediate to advanced topics. Sebastian Log, or Lag, or whatever, he also has a video on field of view visualization. He actually did not use Unity's lightweight render pipeline for this. He did this all by writing custom shaders, which was a little bit too advanced for me since I don't really have a lot of experience writing shaders, and I generally don't enjoy the process. But if you are a little bit more bent towards something like that, this might be a better video for you. And the result I am really happy with. Although I have to be honest, I've worked on this a lot. When I look at my work logs, so I've put about 250 hours into this game already. 30 of those have been just into managing the light, and these player icons are another 49, right? So this has been a major feature for the game just because I knew it would be so important. But the reason why I put 100 hours into this is because I knew it would be the moment-to-moment gameplay that I really had to nail. And what's cool about this is you can actually see my characters who are there, and if I have them move around, so I'll have this guy move around and these guys move around, you'll see them move as I traverse the map. And then when I actually have my light on him, the icon fades away and I can just see his body. So I thought that was a really cool effect as well, so that if I'm looking over here, I'm not distracted by that. I could just see his actual form, so I can worry about not shooting him, because I probably am going to have friendly fire in this game. Likewise, the enemies have sort of the same logic applied to them, where if you look at them, you'll see them, but of course you don't see their icons. So I have two enemies who are hanging out over here. However, you can't see their player icons because they're disabled, since you shouldn't know where they are unless you're looking directly at them. So that is sort of what the final product looks like. Let me now explain how I'm doing the post-process rendering to get that effect of only showing them when I'm aiming at it, and then hiding the player icons when I have the light on top of it. So the way that I set that up was I have two cameras in the scene, and you actually don't need two cameras for this setup, but I needed two cameras for another reason, I believe. And I decided it would just be easier if I had all of my fancy overlay graphics pipeline stuff on a separate camera. So this main camera basically renders so I'll turn off the overlays. This is everything rendered by the default camera. So it's basically the scene without the darkness on top of it. Fairly straightforward here. Now, if I put on the overlay camera, here is everything that's getting added by the overlay camera. So the first step is the culling mask, where I basically choose which layers are going to be shown by this camera, which include the UI layer, which includes these entrance symbols, which tell you that there's a door or a window here that you can go through. The light layer, which is being created by the light which I'm shooting out from this guy's gun, right? That's essentially the flashlight on his gun. He's in a T-pose right now, right? This is obviously still a lot of work in progress. The next things are things which are only visible inside of the light, and things which are only visible outside of the light. So all of the player avatars are only visible inside of the light, which means if I look in a different direction, you won't see them. And then the player icons are only visible outside of the light, which means if I aim at it, it will go away. Simple enough. And then what we have here is basically two of the different examples. So my ally here is only visible inside the light, and then when I move away, I'm going to see the icon, which was otherwise occluded. And is there anything? Oh, and then I just have overlay, which is again just some UI. Nothing too exciting there. So let's jump into it. This is all done through a custom renderer called the BB Custom Forward Renderer Data. So let's open that up. Now, I have to say, my heart is hurting a little bit because this was one of the most painful parts of this project. I've been working on this for maybe the last week. Obviously I've got a full-time job, so I don't get to work on this too often. It's just a passion project after all. But The last 10 hours that I've worked on this have been so frustrating because whenever I edit something here, so let's say I change the light to be opaque and then I move away, or sorry, if I move away, it doesn't make a difference. But if I relaunch the game, this is actually not saved. Any changes to this editor is not saved. You have to, if you want to edit a render feature, you explicitly have to click on the render feature through this menu. Like, you can't edit it here. You have to click here and then edit it here, which is just so fucking stupid. I don't even want to start. I spent maybe 5 hours like trying to figure that out, so it made me go a little bit crazy. But hey, we made it in the end, and I figured out how it was working eventually. So I'm going to explain this to you. Basically, the way that you could think about this custom forward renderer data, is it's a result of several composite parts. So if I uncheck all of them, you will see the graphical elements slowly disappear inside the scene. And all I've done is, you could sort of think of it like a recipe. I'm adding each of these elements one by one until we get the final result. So the very first step is the light render feature, which I will click on here so we can not have too much on the screen. Man, can I make that a little bit bigger? I guess I can't. I can't zoom in too well, but what we're doing here is we're basically saying everything on the light layer mask, anything that is marked as light, which is basically just my flashlight, we're going to replace the stencil. So the stencil is sort of like an intermediary scratch pad or blackboard, whatever you want to call it, blackboard, whatever you want to call it. It's just a place to write down a little bit of information. And so what we're doing with the stencil here is we are replacing all of the positions where the light is and saying, hey, just keep this in mind. This is where the light is located. So that later on, when we need to determine whether or not something is in the light, we can just check that location and see whether or not the stencil has been written to that location. So that's what this is doing. It's writing to the stencil by the always comparison. It's saying always replace the stencil location with this location. That's what that's saying, basically on a per pixel basis. So the next step is only visible inside of light. So what that is doing is it is saying, hey, for anything that is opaque and also in the layer only visible inside of light, go through this stencil comparison. And that comparison is, if you are equal to the stencil, then keep that pixel. Otherwise, do not keep that pixel. So what that's saying is, if you are located basically where the stencil is, which, as we know, based on our first pass, we said the stencil is where the light is. So therefore, right, transitive property of equality, we can say wherever the light is, we will render a pixel. So that is now saying we will create the dude here if we are pointing in that direction. So that's what that does. And then we actually are doing just the opposite for the outside of light. So if we open that one up here, it says the comparison, same thing. The only difference is not equal. So in this case, we're saying render, show this shadow mask everywhere except where the light is. And I have that applied to both the shadow, which is I think called darkness over here. So that's what this is. We could turn it on and off. It's basically just a black image with a little bit of transparency. And we're saying render that everywhere except for where the light is. And we do the same thing with the live icons so that they don't show up when I'm aiming my light that way. And I think that's pretty much it. We have a few more additions here, like for example, the overlay will render on top of everything. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Though I have to be honest, it doesn't look too good when it's on top of the player icon. So maybe that's something I need to tune a little bit. But that's basically how I achieve the effect. And I'm really happy with it so far. I think it has a long way to go, obviously. This game is, we're hundreds of hours in. As crazy as that seems. Obviously, a lot of that time is networking too. But we have hundreds of hours to go. This game is probably going to take another year, if not many months. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the future. This is obviously a lot of fun to work on in my free time. And I'm excited to share the process with you and give you updates along the way as I face new and exciting challenges in the development process. So, if you have any ideas for how I can better improve that visual aesthetic of this sort of Rainbow Six Siege gameplay, but in 2D, I would love to hear from you because right now I'm really at the drawing board trying to think about different ideas and what can be exciting. I have a lot of ideas with respect to how we can play with light. For example, maybe characters have special abilities where they could put some light on the map, and then now whenever you walk through that area, you're going to be exposed. Or maybe you could shoot out the light in order to walk past that area. But then people heard that you did some shots in that area, so they know you're roughly around this location due to the sounds. I think Horror Field does a really good job of visualizing footsteps. If you've seen that game, it's a really great 2D game, sort of a rendition of Death Till Dawn. What is that game called? The one where it's an asymmetrical game where there's like a big bad guy hunting for players who have to restart generators. I forget what that's called. I think it's Death by Dawn, Death by Daylight, or something like that. It's kind of like a 2D version of that. It's called Horror Field. Really good 2D game. So that's been another game that I've been looking at and thinking about. So that could be a creative idea. And then the other thing that I told you Rainbow Six Siege does really well, Life After Death. Oh, man, I have so much ideas on how to go with that. I definitely want to go further fantasy than they've gone. So I'd love for you to come back as a ghost and have some way to, screw around with people who are currently in the game, or maybe they will I don't know, just cause some shit by one way or another. I think that could be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be doing play tests of this game, but mostly internally. Sadly, I don't have a Steam page up for this game, so if you want to follow more information of that, I don't have anything right now. But I'm going to be doing a lot more posts on the process and development of this game as it goes along on YouTube, and I read every single comment. So if you have any feedback, just drop it there. I'll definitely check it out. If you want to see more videos or get the update when I post, hit subscribe, ring the bell icon, all that stuff. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.